In this episode of Bitcoin Mentor, we obviously talked about price. It's been a week since the US election, and a lot has changed. We got into Trump's promises of a Bitcoin strategic reserve, and also the United States state of Pennsylvania has proposed something similar. We talked about whether having governments own a whole lot of Bitcoin is a good thing. Obviously, it is for price, but maybe it isn't for other reasons. And what is more important, having a government Bitcoin strategic reserve or just having government get out of the way, allowing us to exchange Bitcoin as currency without it being taxed like an asset? And we finish up a little chat about our favorite Austrian economist who just doesn't seem to quite get it, Peter Schiff. All right, welcome again to episode 2 of Mentor Session. That's what we're calling ourselves, right?
Yeah, Mentor Session. And funny enough, episode 1 will never be released. That's just a secret one for the big fans later.
Perfect. Well, I am Gary. That is my fiat name. I've yet to come up with my Bitcoin name. We'll maybe get to that in episode 3 or whatever. And I'm with Nate. Nate, welcome. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty well, Gary. How are you doing today?
I can't complain. Did you like how I just assumed the role of the host?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't expect nothing less from a only child actor.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, the world revolves around me.
If there is a spotlight, Gary will be in it.
Let it be known that if anybody should be hosting it, it is Nate, because he has the technical expertise. And if this were me actually running this right now, it would be done with 2 cups, Dixie string, and a Polaroid camera. So thank you to Nate for making this all happen. Well, hey, here we are. We're all rich now, right?
Yeah, right. We're on our way out of fiat slavery. The price is pumping and things are looking good, which actually, let's just pop over to Time Chain Calendar right now and take a look at what's going on there. So if I pull up the stats currently, Gary, we've had a dip, and I've seen so much salt going around. Everyone's a little bit sad. We've dropped down to $88,421 US per Bitcoin. $1 is going to get you 1,131 sats. Current supply is at 19.78. We are on block 870,428. And whoa, fees have spiked. Currently, we're looking at priority for a transaction is 86 sats per VByte. So we're definitely, it's gone up since I first pulled this up this morning from 55 to 86. So we're definitely seeing a lot more network activity. Anytime fees are currently sitting at 6 sats per VByte, but take that with a bit of a grain of salt. I don't know how long it's going to necessarily take to go through.
Days, weeks.
Who knows at this point?
Well, I was just at the Jersey City monthly Bitcoin meetup group last night, and I showed up with my lovely orange feather boa.
As one should.
As one should, because we're all rich now, and this is the point where we all get girlfriends, right? This is what happens now.
I think my wife would be very upset about that. Yours too.
I think mine would too. So what do we do at this point? I mean, there's going to be a lot of people who don't get what they're holding, who are going to say, well, sell, sell, sell. And I have friends who've done that, I'm sorry to say. And I try to explain to them the point isn't to grow your Bitcoin so you can get more worthless paper money. The point is to grow your Bitcoin so you can grow your Bitcoin, because 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, as we know. Is there anything we can do to help these people understand that, no, when you get a profit, this is not a profit. You're just stacking Bitcoin.
It's the classic, they haven't come to terms, and a lot of times it's they haven't seen the problem necessarily yet too. They haven't come to the realization that it's not their Bitcoin going up. I know it feels that way, and as we're getting more adoption, it's kind of kicking in. But just like your house prices, your house isn't more valuable. Mine is probably less valuable. The kids are just like knocking the walls, ruining the carpet, and I'm not cleaning that up. I'm waiting until they're all past 5, and then I'll deal with that stuff. There's no point right now. But my house hasn't greatly improved. I mean, in Canada, there is an unnatural amount of demand as they keep just bringing in more people and foreign workers at just ungodly, unsustainable levels. But still, realistically speaking, guys, you're moving from the best money to the worst money, and you're not realizing that it's not necessarily Bitcoin go up, it's dollar go down, and that's just being reflected there, right? And as soon as man, it almost reminds me, did you play any card games as a kid? Did you ever have Pokemon cards, Magic the Gathering, or anything along these lines? Anything tradable?
You're going to appreciate this
Okay.
because I came a little bit after the Magic the Gathering phase. I and my friend bought Star Wars collectible card game.
Yes, nice.
I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it was like a post-Magic thing, and we thought, oh, this is going to be the next big thing. This was our like Ethereum to Magic the Gathering's Bitcoin.
See, this reminds me of like when I was like, if you're just watching like some kids hanging out in the park and they're doing a trade, and you've got like the little 4-year-old, and you've got like maybe the like 10-year-old brother or cousin who's like, no, this is a great trade. I'm gonna give you this card, and you're gonna give me your card that you got in your pack. And the little kid thinks he's getting a good one. He's taking the advice of big cousin, big brother the whole time, but he's just getting screwed. So to all those people out there that are selling their Bitcoin, thinking like, hey, I got away, just know that you're the child on the playground getting taken advantage of.
Yeah, a dear friend of mine who I finally convinced to buy some Bitcoin, I guess maybe a year ago, she bought it around 50,000. Of course, we know what the price is now. And I think in terms of fiat, she's currently up. I think she put in $20,000 initially, and
Yep.
she's up like 19 or something like that, whatever the actual number was. And she told me she talked to a friend of hers who's a financial advisor, and he told her, well, you're up 19, so you should take out that profit and leave the other 20 in there, almost as if you just are putting it in now, and now you have the profit. And I said, okay, well, in my mind, I'm like, she said, is he right? I said, well, first of all, the fact that he said that tells me he doesn't fundamentally understand what it is that you hold. But in a more practical sense, okay, let's say you take out the 19. Yeah. Where are you going to put it?
What are you going to do with it?
What do you plan on doing with it? Yeah. And then she thought for a second. She's like, oh, yeah, you're right. Because as I had to explain to her, you put it in the bank, that's just going to lose value. You could try to pick a stock or two, but if you keep up with, the Dow Jones or the S&P, you're doing what? Maybe S&P 8-9% a year, 10%. If real inflation is probably close to that number, not what the official U.S. government CPI says it is. So maybe you get lucky on something like Nvidia, but how often are you going to be lucky again? Are you going to be able to pick the right thing?
And are you going to be more lucky than Bitcoin? I just want to pull this up here quick too. I think it's really important to that point, right? Is that this can run away from you so fast, right? Yeah. We have gone up so much in the last week, and we saw it over last weekend. Let me leave a larger chart here. Boom, right? This all of a sudden can just take off. And we know that Bitcoin loves to do this. I always tell my wife that Bitcoin is doing Bitcoin things because it does nothing most of the time. It just drives you insane, might like trickle down. And then you'll have like a 48-hour period where like we almost got the God candle in USD terms previously. And so if you start getting cute and taking profit or trying to like roll it back in at a lower price or anything along these lines, you're just going to end up with less Bitcoin. And I think the thing that's going to be really difficult, I think, for retail to swallow over the next year, I think the bigger institutions like the Wall Street kind of guys, they've been playing with big sums of money for a long time, that they're more familiar with this concept. But I think retail needs to really look at the log chart and not the linear chart, in the sense that they're going to start getting kind of knocked around and really get a lot of greed, fear, FOMO, the works from the nominal price difference, while not paying attention to the price changes in percentage terms. Like Nika was saying it on Simply Sessions last night, right? Like 100K is just around the corner, and then 200K, that's only a 2x from there. That's very, like, if that was the entirety of this cycle, that would be very disappointing for most Bitcoiners, right? But for retail, they're going to look at like another 100,000 on top versus looking at it just like necessarily 100% or a doubling from there. And I think that is going to spook them, and they're just going to make some poor decisions. When realistically, guys, like this is savings technology. Just the goal is to have more Bitcoin next year than you had this year, and just keep that going, and don't get cute.
That's all it is. And I mentioned to her, and I think we've talked about this before, I'm not in Bitcoin because I'm like a gambler. I'm not a huge, big risk taker with my investments. I'm in it because, yes, short and medium term, there's volatility compared to fiat, but long term, I view it as the safest growth investment you can possibly make. I have it in there because in 10, 20, 30 years, I still want my wealth. That's it. It's a safe investment for me. It's not a risky one.
No, I completely agree. Gambling is not for me. It never has been. I got friends that like to go to the casino and play games, and they'll get a little bit of they'll get a kick out of it. For me, I don't get that. Like, I don't have that emotional payoff. It doesn't work. I mean, I got this little, where is it? Whoop, little bit axe hanging out in the back shelf here that's solo mining. And that is as close to gambling as I'm ever going to get. And I completely agree. It's weird. I don't have any other investments. I have my Bitcoin and I have my house. I mean, when I was younger, back in 2008. So when I graduated high school in 06, right? And then I've been working since I was like 13 or 12. I've always had jobs like driving range, hockey ref. Like, dad got me working. I liked having money. I've always had jobs. And so for my first 2 years at university there, I was still living at home. So I didn't have rent. I just had money piling up from the summer jobs. And of course, everyone's like, "Oh, you don't forget, this is 2006 and 2007. Like, you got to put all that in the stock market." Oh, okay. Are you sure? Like, yeah. And you're a young man, so you want to go out on the risk curve. I had no idea what we were talking about at the time, right? No idea. It's like, okay, apparently this will go up at some point in time. And so I'm taking financial advice from, financial advisors and these things too. And yeah, I just got completely wiped out in the '08 crash. There was just nothing there. I was like, oh, okay, so that's my experience with investing. That's gone now, and I just never returned to it. And then it wasn't until coming up on 2019 where I had money for a down payment, and we started seeing, I started seeing kind of like the writing on the wall for the COVID stuff and what the government was going to do. And I had to I need gold. Oh, I need gold real bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which prompted me to then take a second look. It's like, well, that's a little bit hard to take custody of. Let me take a second look at Bitcoin. Like, from there, the rest was history. Like, I was done, right? It was just 7 hours of audiobooks and podcasts and reading a day. And there was no coming back from that. But at no point in time with Bitcoin was I attempting to have some sort of like I was hoping that number would go up, but it wasn't an investment. Its original purpose from the start was, I need to get my family a home. And I'm worried that it's going to run away from me if I can't protect the purchasing power, right? And I think that's where you got to put your energy, where you got to put your mindset on that.
Yep. Exactly. Well, hey, we're here, and it's about a week after the election, or the U.S. election. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about why number go up, because I was sitting by my computer the evening of the United States election, Trump versus Harris, and at around, 8:30 p.m., I noticed that it went from hovering around 60 to 869, where it was most of the day, suddenly up to around 75. And I'm like, all right, well, somebody or some people have a pretty good idea of how this is going to turn out.
Bitcoin smells something.
Bitcoin smells something. And obviously, everybody's very excited about Trump for saying that, he wants to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
I agree.
Yes. Obviously, we all know that helps number go up. Yeah. Obviously, a huge organization like the United States government, the largest organization on the face of the earth, the richest on the face of the earth, would have a big impact on Bitcoin by buying some supply, demand, basic stuff. On its surface, number go up seems like a good thing. Do you see any downsides to the U.S. government or any government holding a Bitcoin strategic reserve?
Well, I do, and I see some positives as well too, and I'll try to give like an honest assessment as well. The nice thing is that, of course, no matter how much Bitcoin you have no additional control or say over the network, right? Mm-hmm. So like, our input is roughly the same as Saylor's. Now, our influence in terms of like public sentiment is nowhere near close. Right. But in terms of impact on the network, I mean, it doesn't matter what the U.S. government's going to say. My node's going to run what my node runs. That's first and foremost. I think that's really important. But they do have a huge megaphone to shift the Overton window and public sentiment around it. So I'll start with the positive side of things, is that I don't necessarily know how the government having a strategic reserve is going to play out for the U.S. and for the dollar. I imagine actually probably would be, it almost like would slow the bleeding a little bit and could extend things, which I can very much so make a case that that's actually a negative, right? That we'd want to actually get out of this system and move to the new system rather than really unnecessarily drag it on. But if I try to think about normies, they're so vulnerable. They're so uninformed. And it's not their fault necessarily. The education system has been working against them. The corporate media has been working against them. The fiat system, most people are just so inundated trying to get by and struggling with what would have been good salaries and good positions and good careers years ago. And you're just living on the edge. And I get it. You do not have the time, the mental capacity, and that's not even a knock on them. It's like you're just exhausted at the end of the day to try and learn what are thousands of hours of technology, computer, economics, monetary theory, history. Like it's so much to grapple with that it really is going to be kind of niche as it evolves. And so the benefit that I really see to these things is that, and we all do it with things too. We have people that we trust or we look to where we get information to. We have to use heuristics. There's just not enough time in the day. And so
it's a big fancy word. I'm impressed.
Right? Thank you. I've got a few of those in my back pocket. The government coming out with the bills, with it being an election issue, with Bitcoiners being a base that is now being pandered to, which we got to be careful of because they're going to throw out propaganda that works for us, right? That we key into, right? They never were before, but they can say things that we want to hear, and we can be led astray for not paying close enough attention. But the biggest thing is that most people taking a look at it, thinking about it, maybe getting involved, getting curious, is going to come from either pain or from public pressure, from social approval. And I think that's the biggest benefit that we get with Trump's campaign in Bitcoin, with Senator Lummis's bill, is not even necessarily the strategic reserve. It's you got to call a spade a spade. I think if anything, COVID taught us just
we'll call it COVID from now on. That's the new word.
What COVID taught us is that the majority of people want to follow authority.
Yeah. They
want to be told what to do. And I get it, because critical thinking is exhausting. It's tiresome. Going against the grain. We're dogs. We're not cats. We're social creatures, and social pressure is a huge, huge influence on behavior, how we act, even the opinions and things we hold, right? There's genetic components as well too, but so I think the biggest benefit that this has for Bitcoin is that now we have people in positions of authority, and man, as like an anarchist, I hate fucking saying this, that are communicating to a broader base that wants that input from authority to go, it's okay. We support this. This is acceptable. It's not just for criminals and crazy crypto anarchists, right? Yeah. It's an everyday asset that respectable people that the regime respects can have and hold. And while I hate that is the case, that it like for a lot of people that's kind of required, Bitcoin is still a Trojan horse. So fuck it, I don't care. Let's go for it. Like it doesn't matter how somebody gets into Bitcoin. It is, if you have this kind of, well, for lack of a better term, like woke mind virus, and it really feels like a social contagion at times as well too. Bitcoin is too. Luckily, it's a white hat situation. It's everything you need to upgrade your life, be better, healthier, get on a better path, be more productive, build your family, build your relationships. But that orange pill really is like a little software bug that once it gets into your operating system, it spreads to the entire thing. And so if it has to come from authority to get more people adopting and considering it, I'll take it, because I think that ultimately the Bitcoin incentives are actually stronger than the U.S. government.
Now, if the U.S. government or any government holds Bitcoin, they are holding future purchasing power. As an anarchist, or even anybody who just generally doesn't like the idea of the government's boot coming to stomp on them for arbitrary reasons, is that a long-term good thing? Do you want to preserve the power of the U.S. government or other governments around the world, just philosophically speaking?
You just want to pull up here. We got Cynthia Lummis's bill is there.
Yep.
It's going through full.
And in Pennsylvania, they're proposing a Pennsylvania Bitcoin strategic reserve. They just announced that yesterday, Thursday.
Up to 10% of the $7 billion reserve. And I actually think that line is not quite correct, because I think there was another fund as well too. I remember it was like quick math. It was like over 900 million potentially could be allocated. It was almost $1 billion. We've got Pennsylvania. We've got Senator Lummis's bill as well too. And I know that Trump talked about the strategic stockpile of the existing Bitcoin, just moving from, I don't know if it would be Treasury to Defense Department or necessarily how that works, but basically shifting kind of the ownership within. Yeah, I know, right. And so from the anarchist perspective, like, how do I feel about this? It's, it's one of those things that I'm having a continually hard time grappling with, in terms of, it's not end result. Like, I'm convinced of the validity of the moral and ethical arguments that all interactions should be voluntary, which, I mean, that just seems so simple. Like, I don't know why people have a hard time with that. Like, here's the thing. Don't take people's shit and don't hit them.
Yeah.
And we're good. And
Yeah.
we're good. And the magic of that is that if all interactions are voluntary, it means both parties feel that they've increased value by doing it, which means aggregate wealth grows. It only grows. There's no loser in a voluntary trade, more or less. I'm sure someone can come up with a stupid example, but you get my point. And so the hard thing that I'm trying to navigate, or even piece together, is my goal is to move to a free society. My goal is to help that come to fruition for my kids and grandkids, and to build it out in a way that it can't revert. And I want to touch on that in a second as well too. But in terms of, I think Bitcoin is one of the greatest freedom tools for moving and advancing us forward. I think it is almost like the separation of church and state. It'll be the separation of state and money. But I think the separation of state and money almost ends up being the end of state. And you kind of get into a bit of a semantic argument as well too, because people will talk about, well, you could go to different jurisdictions, and you can pay the government for their services, and you can pick and choose which ones you want. It's like, okay, but that's a business, right? If you can't point a gun at me and say you must pay me for things whether you want them or not, then it's not taxation, and I'm great, awesome, wonderful. We're in the system that I want. So moving to that, would a rip off the Band-Aid be best? Would a slow and gradual move be the best? If we're going to try to get in that direction, what are the first steps that we take? And still at this point, like, I don't know. So I'll give you, another little side tangent. We'll go on a rant here. We've got some really interesting names being added to great positions within the Trump administration. We've got Tulsi Gabbard getting one, and in terms on war, she's pretty good. That's moving in a more libertarian direction, but that's still statism. Like, that's still a politician. That's still, it comes with a lot of negatives as well. We've got who was named for Attorney General? Do you remember this?
Oh, it was
Matt Gaetz.
Gaetz, yeah.
You got Gaetz as Attorney General. It's like, okay, that's a small improvement. I can stand that as well too. And then we've got Department of Government Efficiency as well. I like Vivek. I know it's such a. I like Vivek.
Vivek on economic issues is fine. It's just obviously the notion of creating an entire government department to figure out how to cut government.
I know.
It's absurd. I think we joked, like, you really want to cut government, give Ron Paul a copy of the budget, a red pen, and a cup of coffee. He'll be done by lunch.
I got an even better idea. Just give the Canadian government control over the U.S. bank accounts. They'll just freeze them, and nothing will be done. We'll be great. It'll be fine.
Oh, wouldn't that be sweet?
Wouldn't that be? Can you just imagine Trudeau trying to stop Trump's bank account? And no. And then we've also got RFK. Regards, I forget the name of the department, but basically
Health and Human Services.
Thank you, Health and Human Services. Okay. And so the first kind of instinct is like, these are moving in the right direction, right? But my immediate follow up to it is that it doesn't change the incentives of the system or create a permanent fix. Like, let's say, to take an extreme analogy, like Department of Government Efficiency, let's just say Elon and Vivek get in there and they scrap 75% of administrative and government bureaucracy and bloat. Mm-hmm. That's like cutting out 75% of a tumor. When they're gone, it's just going to grow back.
Yeah. And it's not even cutting out 75% of the tumor, because most of government spending is not in efficiency or inefficiency matters. It's four major things: interest on the debt, military, Social Security, Medicare, the entitlement stuff. So you're still nibbling around the edges. Sure. Even if they could get it more efficient, which, okay, maybe they achieve like 5% of their goal. I doubt there's going to be much at all. Most of DC is performative, as I've said before. I used to work in DC, as you know. We called it Hollywood for ugly people. This is all performative stuff.
Which is why you had to leave, being a pretty person.
Well, Thanks. I was fishing for that. Thank you. So that basically, I don't expect much to come of this at all. Now, I'm not trying to be the wet blanket. If there's even some savings, that's better than no savings,
Yep.
and that wouldn't be what we would have gotten with the alternative. The D side, at least not this time around, and usually never. But usually with Republicans, never either. So cool, great, you get a little something. But this is, we say you don't stop this train. You're not going to stop this careening train into the crash that is the United States government debt and its budget. It can't be stopped. It's going to go down sometime. If the U.S. government, I don't mean to take over, because if you had a rest of that thought to make, please feel free.
I got some points when you're done, buddy. Get in there.
Okay. So if the U.S. government, adopts a strategic Bitcoin reserve, are you still there? Because I saw the screen.
Yep, still good. I saw the one.
You're back. So if the U.S. government, let's say, buys, as Trump wants to, I don't know, 1 million Bitcoin, who knows how many dollars they're spending on that and how much it's going to drive up the price and how much it's going to hurt the dollar itself, which, of course, Trump also says he wants to protect. Who knows? So let's say you reach a point where the U.S. government does have 1 million Bitcoin or 2 million Bitcoin. Are there possibilities where they say, okay, well, now this is a quote unquote national security matter. We need to protect our strategic reserve. We need to seize people's nodes for some reason, because this is in the interest of national security. And I don't put anything past the government or politicians. Are there possibilities that something like that could happen down the road?
Absolutely. And kind of one of the things that I worry about too is that, like, if we move down this position, we get this big stockpile of Bitcoin, let's say they go through with it too, right? I still think it doesn't fix the underlying problems. And so that it is eventually, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when that things fully degrade and collapse. And I would expect to see, like, all empires, particularly fiat empires over time, that will have almost like a Soviet Union moment, right? And my biggest concern with that, but again, it's not unrecoverable, is that at the fall of the Soviet Union, you basically had like the oligarchs just like get all the resources, and then you had this basically elitist wealth class who just gobbled everything up. It's not like it was, I don't want to say fairly distributed, because that's a commie term, but it didn't go to the people who were maybe using it or maybe had a better claim to it, and you had this massive wealth, what do you call it? Just a poor distribution, right? Mm-hmm. And so if there's a a giant US stockpile of Bitcoin, it's like, hey, what 3 people have the keys at the end of this kind of thing, right?
Fair.
But even in that circumstance, as much as that would suck, they're still going to have to use that in order to purchase things that they want from other people. Mm-hmm. So over time, it would redistribute to producers, right? It would just make its way out there, but it would be a terrible kind of transition. But if I look even on the more optimistic side, it's like, okay, in terms of long-term getting rid of this violent monopoly that we call the state, right? The best thing about these appointments and the Department of Government Efficiency just goes back to public sentiment. That we have the majority, you can, at least from the popular vote and kind of the results of the election, you have the majority of the populace viewing shrinking government as a positive. And I think that can't be necessarily understated. It's not that what they'll do will end up being the big difference, but these ideas taking root with people as a positive will be the biggest difference. And ultimately, I think it comes down to, like, I really think it playing out, and then you have issues of people kind of fighting for maybe their share of the government resources. But I think that we're moving to more localized communities that will see people kind of, turn their attention more to the direct people around them in a smaller geographical region. And I think largely for Canada, for Europe, for the US, I'm very hopeful of a peaceful divorce, right? Where it really goes back to the states. And it might not even be the United States anymore. It's just, the states. And Texas takes care of Texas, and New York is New York, and Alberta is Alberta, and Germany is not, paying everybody's bills in Europe. That the behemoth systems, I think, have reached their pinnacle. And now we're just on the way down, right? And so if we can get more Bitcoin adoption, which would be great for interstate commerce and exchanging between different countries, then I think it's moving in the right direction. And there's definitely the potential for a much more peaceful and still quick enough kind of transition, right? Like, ultimately, let's just say, let's just say, for example, I'll take Canada, right? Like Alberta is repeatedly just like the redheaded stepchild that just keeps getting beaten, right?
Mhm.
We've got all the energy, and they let us know just how evil we are for having all this energy that pays for all the things that we want. We have equalization payments in Alberta, which means Alberta has to pay for Quebec and Ontario stuff. They like it's basically like 4 billion or whatever it is from Alberta gets shifted over to Quebec to pay for all their things, and their cost of living is lower, and they have a lot more, I believe, programs and things. Like, it's just they're ripping off producers. And Quebec also has their own reason to separate culturally as well too. They've always felt like a country kind of within a country is kind of my, broader understanding. Not from there, don't speak French, but they have the element of wanting to protect their French culture. And ultimately, I think that these, again, like from where I am to Ottawa, our capital, London is closer to Moscow. Like it's thousands of miles away. Like and the fact that they have control over us and dominion over us just makes no sense. But looking at the positives, let's say Alberta gets a strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? We think about, okay, it's going to be in the hands of governments, but then if we end up maybe fracturing and there's going to be commerce and trade between the different provinces, they're going to need an asset to move between nations. And I think ultimately these strategic Bitcoin reserves end up used for moving funds between like different countries. It becomes the new collateral that moves around. So even if the US does amass it, let's say the US needs to buy some oil from the Saudis, they probably won't want the USD at some point in time. And I think that time is getting closer. And so the US government might have to send some of their strategic Bitcoin to buy some energy from the Saudis or from Argentina if they can get their act together. And so even if we do have these big stockpiles that do have it's just a threat of it just taking longer to distribute to the rest of the world, I think it still happens regardless. I think, and people forget this, nations are already existing in an anarchist relationship. That people think about like, oh, anarchy couldn't possibly exist. It would just be chaos. It's like, well, the US and Canada have an anarchist relationship. And the UK
fair.
and right?
I've never thought of that actually.
Right. There's no world government that's like, okay, Canada, here's how you're going to play with the US. It's just, let's just talk. We'll just negotiate for ourselves. We'll freely exchange goods. And look at that. We're buddies. I mean, I know we're kind of like the embarrassing friend, but we're still friends.
You're not the embarrassing friend at all. I'm a big fan of Canadians. Good sense of humor. And apparently you're the less socialist of the two of us when it comes to Bitcoin because of all the regs we have here. And we only have about 10 minutes left. That brings me to another point. We talk about these politicians like Trump talking about a Bitcoin reserve, but it would seem to me, and maybe you differ, that the more important step is regulatory clarity here in the US, because as we know, the Treasury Department treats it as a currency. That's how they get, Samurai Wallet and other people on money laundering schemes, while the IRS, our tax revenue organization, treats it as an asset. So if you want to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin, that's considered selling your asset, and you are taxed on it, a capital gains tax of 20% as if you held it long term, if you did hold it long term. So it would seem to me, at least my thought, is getting regulatory clarity, and ideally that clarity is in terms of it's all currency. We're no more treated as an asset. This is just currency. Would seem to be more important to me than having a Bitcoin reserve. People can spend freely. They can exchange it in and out in terms of other currencies if they want to. I don't recommend it, but there's less of like, oh, well, I just got to hold it. I don't want to sell it because then I have to deal with the IRS and get taxed on it. You have more Bitcoin trade. Do you feel one is more important than the other?
I do. I think the ability to exchange it has a much more profound impact on adoption. And if we can comfortably and simply exchange it and not have to worry about any sort of tax implications, besides like just sales tax or whatever might already exist, that could be massive in terms of adoption. Because anybody who's gone far enough down the rabbit hole, you don't want fiat anymore. You want Bitcoin. And those tend to be the biggest producers, the most productive people. It's from everyone that I talk to, that's who's attracted to it, is people who want to build stuff and add value. And so if I were to pin down the thing that I want, if I got the choice of only one thing and I had to try and make it kind of realistic, I would want some sort of exemption for like de minimis amounts. Like if you could exchange Bitcoin in the US, and if it's anything under like $1,000, there's no additional capital gains or other sort of tax implications with that exchange. I think that would be more sticky and more impactful on adoption. And particular too, because again, you kind of get that if we go through the kind of monetary phases, you kind of have like it's, hobby and trinket and interesting, and then it's store of value and medium exchange, and then sort of unit of account. It's kind of just a possible natural progression. It doesn't necessarily have to follow that way. But if we can get out of the way and allow medium of exchange to go a little bit further, that means it's going to end up in the hands of more people that wouldn't otherwise have considered it for a store of value. There are people that don't have the ability to necessarily save anything up. They're not maybe interested in saving at this point in time, but they might be willing to sell you a really good cheeseburger and take it in Bitcoin, and then they'll convert it out later. And just starting to get them interacting, holding it, touching the network, paying attention to it. Even if you got like a small cafe, and at the end of the month, let's just look at like this month, right? If you had holdings, you had a small cafe and you only had like maybe $1,000 hanging out in there that you'd got from the previous month, and you still had it, right? And then we get one of our Bitcoin runs, and all of a sudden you're looking at 1,500 at the end of the month. And now it's got your attention, right?
Yeah.
That price. So making it easier for people who wouldn't necessarily want to come on the investment or saving thesis to touch it, I think will spread adoption very, very fast.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to, and I would love to expand upon this more in future podcasts with you, but we are, getting short on time. I do have one final question for you. Normally, as you know, I don't like talking about people. There's that saying, dumb people talk about people and smarter people talk about events, and
the smartest people talk about people when the cameras are off.
Exactly. That's the way to do it. And I'm not trying to say I'm smart. I'm just smart enough to know that I'm not that smart. So I always try to learn, and I appreciate that you're here because you're a good teacher. All those caveats, I'm going to talk about a person, Peter Schiff, a person who I liked for many years, and I still like in many ways. He was around during, the Tea Party movement here in the U.S. and Occupy Wall Street, and I enjoyed many of his man on the street segments. And much like us, he fully understands the problem. He gets it from, an Austrian school, totally understands it. He obviously differs on the solution. He is a gold bug, at least publicly, and he says Bitcoin is ultimately going to go to zero. He doesn't believe in it, at least publicly. Now we're at, right now it's at 88,000. We went up to about 93,000 US dollars. Would Schiff ever concede? And if so, how high would Bitcoin have to go relative to US dollars to get him to admit, okay, well, maybe I was wrong?
That's a very interesting question. And it's funny, I just got to pull this up here because I had it ready to go as well too. I still hold that Schiff is just playing the heel. That he is just playing the heel in this situation, and it works for his brand and for getting his name out there. Because even if I share that for me, look at this. Michael Saylor's going to have 100K party, and Peter Schiff would like to come. And you know what? I hope they invite him. Right? I hope they invite him. I think that would be fun. And it would also just be, it's almost like Bitcoin is for friends and enemies. And you can see them all just kind of celebrating and having some fun together. So I'm sure he's just messing around, but I still think that would be wonderful to see him there. And so at what point do I think he would necessarily capitulate? Well, and again, I am probably not giving cognitive dissonance enough credit in ego, because it's very possible that this isn't an act. Right? It's very possible that he hasn't just kept some on the sidelines. Like, I think he's been offered it and had friends in the space for so long that it's possible he's got 12 words in a drawer that he doesn't even know about. So he's technically kind of got some, but he's completely forgotten about it. I think maybe at the market cap of gold, which puts Bitcoin, it's more now. It's north of 500K at this point, because the market cap has been growing since the last time I did the math. So we're like approaching $1 million a coin, which is then sat-cent parity, which is ridiculous, but it's coming. It's coming. And I almost feel like it would, like with most people, let's assume that everything he says is completely genuine. And again, like I've heard him on the podcast with Mallers, he was making arguments that a good Austrian would know is not accurate or true, to the point where I was like, dude, I know you know this. So I think we're a little bit of a bad actor necessarily here. I think that Schiff possibly publicly capitulating comes with either one of two things: retirement, that there's no incentive to keep harping on this anymore. There's no Schiff Gold, right? There's no banking system. He's done. He's tapped out. particularly if if his son ever sees the light again and comes back to Bitcoin, or maybe has a business or something along those lines as well too. He could be forced into it if he's in a banking relationship with somebody who wants it as collateral. And it might be almost like that medium exchange thing, being like, "Hey, I'm going to transfer. I gotta settle up with this bank here. Let me send you over some 10-year treasuries." And they go, "Nope, send me Bitcoin. Go sell your treasuries or sell your gold and get me some Bitcoin." So it could be a pristine collateral thing. And then the other one, I think, is and I'm trying to think of how we would be able to kind of detect this in I'm sure there are smarter people than me. Immediately comes to mind like Lynn Alden or Greg Foss or any of these guys who really understand the monetary system. If there was some sort of a signal or tell that gold had lost or was losing its monetary premium and was just falling to jewelry, decoration, and industrial uses. Like if it became apparent that because I think silver's lost its monetary premium, right? I think that's why the gold to silver ratios changed so much. I think that's gone. I think it's just an industrial metal and kind of pretty and cool and stuff as well too. And I think that gold will have the same fate. And I like almost like real estate. I don't think it'll necessarily happen in nominal terms. It would almost be something like, let's just say gold hits 5,000, right? And then it just never moves. We keep having inflation, Bitcoin keeps running, and that it reaches a point where you're looking at its consumption and use in other industries, and you're going, this is just a commodity, right? This is just trading like oil. There's no monetary premium here anymore. And that painful moment where gold is no longer money of any kind, like it's no longer used as money. The same way that salt and seashells and cattle are no longer money, one day gold will no longer be money.
Wait, they're not?
That's why I rejected your invoice. Fuck. Gary's I can just picture you trying to like pack a sheep into a FedEx box and be like, I owe Nate 2 lambs. Right?
All right. I
no wonder everybody wants to employ you. You're just taking barrels of salt.
All right. Can we not embarrass me any further? Now I got some things I got to figure out now, man.
You and Schiff, and I think you should have a good conversation about it because it's tragic and it's sad, and it's happened to many civilizations before where the better technology removes a monetary premium on glass beads and things. I think it's wampum was the native one as well too.
Yeah,
that will happen, and I think that moment would be the painful moment that you have no choice but to see the world as it is because you can't function otherwise.
Indeed.
Shit, the cops are here.
The cops are here. They're coming to get my sheep. It's been great. I got to go take my daughter ice skating. I guess I'll have to pay with something else now. But you have a good day. It's been great. I look forward to the next one. We have to come up with a proper sign off because this is kind of lame. But
I agree.
We'll figure something out.
In the meantime, we'll just leave it with the cops are here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Later, buddy.
Later.
Thank you so much for tuning in. You don't have to, but if it's not too inconvenient, a like, a share, or a subscribe is hugely appreciated. If you'd like to learn more about Bitcoin Mentor education and consulting services, head on over to bitcoinmentor.io to book a free discovery call.